Hey everyone, welcome to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling, and I not sure. John, have you been on here before? I know I've been on your channel.
I don't think so. I think this is my first time, so thanks
So
for
this
having
is
me
a
on.
hit. This is a very special episode because for the first time, we've got a very special guest, John Gaffney from Lair of The Alchemist on YouTube. He also does an AC/DC podcast, Kicked in the Teeth, with our good friend Martin Popoff. And John and I have appeared in some of Martin's books. Uh, we've been like ships in the night, so it's about time that I had John on this show to talk. And actually, tonight we're on this episode. We're going to talk about Boston. We're going to talk about the band Boston and do a top 10 Boston songs list with some honorable mentions. And John and I were talking off camera, and Boston's such a funny case because, as John said, they don't have enough albums, um, and they're spaced so far apart that it's uh, it's not easy to do a list that's all encompassing. I guess maybe that might be a good way of putting it. I don't know, John. Did you have a hard time coming up with 10 Boston songs without just listing
Uh,
the eight that are on the debut and a couple
yeah,
others?
exactly. I mean, I could have just picked the eight from the first album and then picked two from Don't Look Back and then just said, okay, that's good enough and walked away from it. But I listened to all the records. I deliberately try to, because like you mentioned, what's difficult with Boston is that there's two big things for me, two or three big things. One, their first album is absolutely legendary. It's one of those records where basically every song on it has gotten played on classic rock radio, which can be a positive and a negative. There's this could, if you made a video of high burnout factor albums, this album could be listed in there because seven out of these eight, seriously, seven out of these eight songs, if I sit in my car long enough listening to my local classic rock radio station, I'm bound to hear one of the seven of these eight songs from the first record eventually, within the first couple hours, probably. I mean, this is classic rock radio defined, that first record. But there's no denying that it's a classic. So for me, I factored in a little bit of the burnout factor with that record. But when it comes to things like this, I always put myself as, where was I in the middle of my history with this band? Maybe not necessarily when I first heard them, but maybe a couple years into it before the serious burnout factor kicked in. But enough after the initial hearing it for the first time type of phase thing. So you got that going on. Then there's such a time frame, especially after Don't Look Back, between the records, 5, 10, 15 years between albums. So you get productions that sound like you get the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s production values. So it's slightly jarring that the records all of a sudden take these large leaps to
Yeah.
different decades. Then, of course, you have lineup changes, and that's slightly jarring too, again, because they don't have that many records, and there's these lineup changes. The consistent being, of course, Tom Scholz, who's sort of the mastermind of this whole thing, and it's his guitar really that sort of glues all this together if there's one consistent sort of sonic sound. So I listened to everything, and I didn't want to just pick the eight songs off the first record. So I deliberately picked some later songs, and I was kind of surprised because there are some really good stuff on the later albums. I mean, it is kind of a case when you have something like that first record, it's a legendary, put it in the Smithsonian, put it in a time capsule type of record for what 70s rock is about. When I think about 70s rock, like Boston, Cheap Trick, these are the bands that come to my mind. So it is a little bit of a diminishing, you used the expression diminishing returns with this. But there is some good stuff across the catalog. Tom Scholz is a genius in my opinion. I love his guitar playing. I wish they would put out more stuff. I wish they had, here's something interesting. I wish they had a good live album, like from the 70s, like maybe after Don't Look Back, a double live record from these guys would have been
Surprising.
amazing. Exactly. They're one of these bands like, amazing that they never put out a live record. Brad Delp, as getting ready for this episode, it reminded me of what an absolutely amazing singer he is. I mean, he's a guy, everybody knows he's a great singer, and maybe this is because, again, the sparse catalog. His name doesn't get brought up right away. When people talk about the greats of the 70s and the 80s, Robert Plant, Ian Gillan, Ronnie James Dio, and justifiably so, they're amazing singers. Glenn Hughes, and usually Brad Delp will eventually come up somewhere, but oh my goodness, man. There were so many times where I was just like so taken aback by what an amazing, amazing voice he has.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame because and Boston were one of those bands that, that the critics like the expression faceless corporate rock. And so you didn't really know the names, you didn't really know the personnel in
Yeah,
Boston that well. But yeah, Brad Delp he opened his mouth and it, he could take a mediocre song and make it fantastic. He could take a really good song and make it magical. And it he always made it sound so easy. Um,
yeah,
and it's such a tragedy that we lost him. You know, it's such a sad story there. But you're right. It's surprising that there's never been a Boston live album. But if I had to guess, I'd guess it's because Tom Scholz is such a perfectionist
yeah,
that if there
mhm,
was a Boston live album, it wouldn't sound like a live album because it would be all tweaked. So I think the
yeah,
best you're going to do is get a good bootleg, a good
yeah. And I was
soundboard
gonna say,
recording, maybe. But yeah, it's a shame. And they weren't a
yeah.
video band either.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say almost Tom Scholz almost overshadows everybody else in the band, which is kind of strange, right? Because usually in situations like this, you get Page Plant, Jagger Richards, where it's that sort of guitar duo team. But how many people say Scholz Delp?
Yeah.
They that never really comes up. And I don't know if it's just because it's so much of it is Tom's band in
I
a
think it's
way.
because he also wrote most of the songs
Everything.
himself too.
Yeah, right. So it's almost like, yeah, and so he just sort of casts a shadow over it, and I think that that sort of diminishes.
But
Uh,
without Brad to deliver those songs,
oh
it wouldn't have been the same to deliver his
no,
and
no, absolutely not.
to get that emotion going where you feel something when you
Absolutely.
hear them.
Absolutely. He's just
So,
incredible in those layered vocals. It's such a signature of the Boston sound. The layered guitars, Tom
yep,
Scholz's guitar sound, one of my favorite. If I
so
made a top
distinctive.
five guitar sounds, I would have to say him. And if I had to make the top five most distinct, recognizable, unique guitar sounds, I would put Tom up there, right up there with like Brian May and guys
Yeah,
that you just hear it and he has his own signature tone. So much so that he made his own gear and he
yep,
created this thing was called a
the
Rockman that was
Rockman,
sort
yeah.
of like a portable little guitar amp that sort of recreated the Boston sound. So he was when you talk about a guy like controlling all aspects of everything, I mean, he really did all the way down to the production, the recording. I mean, it's a famous story and about how the first Boston album was really made in Tom's basement,
Yeah.
which at that time is I mean, now everybody can do that, but back then that was just mind-blowing and unheard of.
And multi-tracking and
Yeah.
layers of vocals, layers of guitars, and yeah, and he created a sound Boston didn't sound like any other band. No,
Hmm.
no band had come before them that sounded like that. And I think a band like Boston had to have had a big influence on bands like Def Leppard with
Oh
that
yeah.
quest for multi-tracking. As a matter of fact, I think that Phil Collen and Steve Clark used Rockmans at least some when they were making
Yeah.
Hysteria. So on the other
That's
hand, Boston also made it acceptable to have these ridiculously long gaps between albums too. And I think part of the
yeah.
problem is that Tom Scholz never had anyone over his shoulder going, Tom,
Yeah.
it's done.
Yeah.
We got to get it out. We got to get on the road.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and
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 that
that
starts to work against him really
yeah,
quickly. really after the second record, it starts to become a hindrance to the band. And really after the third album, Third Stage, it's like, I don't want to say they slip away into oblivion, but they basically become just a band that's people don't even realize they're putting out records, really. Most people are just like, oh yeah, the More Than a Feeling band, and they
Yeah.
recognize all these songs, but nobody. And I mean, I saw them live like maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It's the only time I saw them live. And I'm trying to think if they played anything past the first three records. I don't think that they did. I think it was all, heavily the first record, second, and a couple songs from the third, and then that was it.
Yeah. It's funny. Yeah. I've never talked to many people, as many people as I've talked to online. You never hear about what a great live band Boston were.
Mm.
Nobody talks about it because, so have you got any on before we get into the top 10, John, have you got any honorable mentions you want to just say real quickly, like some cool songs that didn't quite make your top 10?
Yeah. I mean, again, I said that I wanted to grab some different songs from the different eras. I basically made a playlist, and so I left stuff off the first record that I really struggled with, that I probably should have put on. Like, for instance, I feel real guilty about not putting Foreplay and Long Time on my list. I feel guilty for not putting Peace of Mind, Hitch a Ride, Let Me Take You Home Tonight. I could have put any of those on there. Those were the ones that I could have put them on there. I didn't want it to be all the first record. I wanted sort of a variety in my list. I kind of viewed this like, again, I made a playlist on my Apple Music, and I just sort of liked the variety of what I picked. I felt like it was a nice sort of selection of tunes across the different eras, and I was really digging, kind of walking around with my headphones on, listening to this playlist today. So yeah, those ones that I mentioned, I feel real guilty about not putting Foreplay Long Time on the. I had it on the list, I took it off, I put it back on, I took it off. So I do feel slightly guilty about having that one not on. So let's call it our top 11. That
Yeah, yeah.
so I can
That
squeeze that in there.
that yeah, that debut album is so remarkable that I've said this to people. Like, first of all, I don't talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because I don't have any use for it, but I'm really surprised that Boston aren't in there. And I've said this, if Boston did nothing else but that first album and then disappeared, they
Yeah,
should still be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for that, because that was such a monumental album. But so I've got three songs, and again, like on any other day, these would end up in the top 10. And for me, I'm going to play the first song I ever heard, or I'm going to list the first song I ever heard from Boston. And the first I ever heard of Boston as a band, and that is Amanda from Third
mm,
Stage. Fall of '86, this came out and was all over the radio. I didn't know there was a band called Boston, and they still didn't make any videos. And yet, this was a number one song. This got played
hmm,
all the time. And it's a great song. It's, only a band like Boston would have the guts to open an album with a ballad, but it's almost
yeah,
like we've been away 8 years, we're back, and I got to give it to them. It worked. I mean, they came out with Third Stage, and I think it sold 3-4 million copies. It's
yeah,
it did pretty good, by anybody's standards. The next one is from the first album, and that is Smokin', which is a really fun, rockin' shuffle. And again, it gets the toe tapping. It's a great song, great riff. And it didn't quite make my top 10. And it's, such is the appeal of this band that Anthrax did a cover of Smokin'. They did a covers EP a few
yeah,
years ago, and they had Fred
yeah,
Fred Mandel, who played with Queen on stage, play the keyboards, and it's really cool. So that should tell you something about the broad appeal they had. Like, nobody thought of them, oh, that's wimpy. No, it's really good.
yeah.
And my third one is also from Third Stage. And it wasn't a single, but it did get a lot of airplay, and that's Cool the Engines. I really liked that one.
Hmm.
So yeah, those are three songs I did want to give a shout out to, but they didn't make my top 10. So Let's
I
let
almost had Amanda on mine too. I should have mentioned Amanda that that was one that was in consideration to get on my list, but it just got bumped out by the other ones that I picked.
Yeah, it's funny because I mean, I in 1986 I was really listening to radio and stuff, and I'd heard a lot of 70s rock. I'd just never heard of this band Boston. After that, I realized, oh, okay, these guys have been around for a long time, and you know, their first two albums were really big, and but yeah, that was my introduction. So let's get into our actual top 10. You're number 10, John.
Heaven on Earth from Life, Love, and Hope. This is their most recent record. For me, the guitars sound fantastic. On the what year did this come out? I should have written down the years.
2013, and
Tw-
this is really funny. I'll just jump into because it's my number 10. It's my number 10.
All right.
I went back, yeah, this came out in 2013, and I went back and listened to this album. I always liked that first song, Heaven on Earth. I always thought that was a
Yeah.
pretty classic Boston song. I went and listened to this whole thing, and I was surprised because it was better than I remembered it. It's about half, like there's 11 songs
Yeah.
on it. Two of them are ones that appeared on the previous album. So let's say of nine songs, I'd say about four of them are pretty good. Better than I remembered. But yeah, uh, I think Heaven on Earth is worthy of, a Hall of Fame mentioned, top 10 list because it's a quintessential Boston song.
Yeah, it's a very classic sounding Boston. It's got that guitar sound, that mid-rangey Rockman guitar sound, the vocals, the soaring, sort of angelic type of vocals. They kind of sound like Brad Delp, but they're of course they're not because sadly Brad had passed at this point, I believe. So it's David Louis St. August,
Yeah, so
and
David
it's just got
Victor
the. Go
was
ahead.
in a band called Velocity.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
some people might be aware of that. They put one album out in the 90s, I think. And Louis St. August was the singer of the Christian rock band Mass, who were
Oh
also from
wow.
Boston.
I've got one of their records.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's and
Interesting.
it doesn't sound it's very Boston friendly. It doesn't sound
Hmm.
exactly like Brad, but
It's in the
it sounds like
vicinity
Boston.
of, yeah, it's right. It's got that sort of vibe.
Yeah.
And it just has those, I put a note here, those comforting layered Boston harmonies in the chorus, that
Yeah.
just the chorus comes along and there's just like all these sort of angelic, almost singing, very Queen-like. Queen has a signature
Yeah.
layered vocal thing when a Queen chorus kicks in. Well, Boston has their own signature kind of thing too, and you get that here at
It's like
so
the
number
American
10.
version of Queen, really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, from so number 10, Heaven on Earth
Yeah.
from Life, Love, and Hope.
That's really interesting that we both had the same one. So I guess we'll go to your number nine then.
Okay, I had a good time from corporate America. This what year did this come out again? I should have
This
written
came out in
down these.
2002.
Right. I like the uplifting lyrics. I really like the chord progression. The guitar, of course, sounds great. This is another one. I believe it's the first song on the record.
Yeah.
Sounds like classic Boston on an album that doesn't really have a lot of songs that sound like classic Boston. So
Yeah.
I like the false ending too, where there's the girl's voice, want to do it again, and then it sort of kicks back in. So I just kind of like the uplifting lyrics, the uplifting chord progression, and just the way the whole song kind of feels. And again, has this classic Boston vibe, whereas the rest of the record, there's different singers. It alternates, I think, between like two or three different singers, and it's just not. It just doesn't really sound like Boston. This one isn't on the streaming services either for anybody out there curious, but I'm guessing that it just. In fact, I wasn't even aware that this album existed until I started getting ready for this. This one completely flew by my radar.
This yeah, I didn't pick anything off this album. I remember thinking that neither of the last two albums were all that good, and then I come to realize that no, I was wrong about Life, Love, and Hope. That's got its moments, but corporate America runs out of steam really fast. And
Yeah.
I remember when that album came out, and I didn't get it, and I should have, because I ended up paying way too much for the CD than it was worth because they were on this label Artemis Records, which went out of business. Like it was one of those deals where they put a record out and it
Hmm.
went out of business. Like I don't know immediately, but I mean, just if you just look at this. the CD. This looks cheap to me.
Yeah.
This looks
Yeah.
indie. And you expect more, something more grandiose
Yeah.
from
From a
Boston.
band
And then
that's
that's
sold
another thing
millions of
about
records.
Life, Love,
So
and Hope. It looks classy. Now the cover, that's a pretty classic Boston cover, but this, I don't know. That just let this that whole album just left a bad taste in my mouth. And I'm glad it wasn't the very last one. But yeah, that's not a that I had a good time is not a bad song. One thing that annoys me about that though, not fault of the song, but Sony initially put their greatest hits out in 1997, and it had two new songs on it. It had "Tell Me" and "Higher Power," and at some point, that first issue of greatest hits was pulled, and it was replaced. And then the second issue starts off with "I Had a Good Time," which is fine,
mm,
but they removed "Tell Me," which that original greatest hits is the only place that song ever appeared. And I don't
interesting.
think you should ever do that. It's like
Yeah.
when Kansas, when they put out the best of Kansas in the late 90s, they reissued it. The song Perfect Lover was a new song on the 1984 issue of the best of Kansas, and now that's gone. So I just don't think you should ever
Yeah.
take away. You should only
Yeah.
add.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Good choice. My number nine, we're gonna get classic right away. Song from the debut. Um, Something About You. I really like this song. I think this could have been a single, but you had said, I'm pretty sure that at one time or another, I've heard all eight songs at one time or another. Obviously, you heard More Than a Feeling the most, followed by Peace of Mind and Foreplay Long Time. I hear Rock and Roll Band a lot, but I think
Hmm.
I've heard them all at least once on the radio over the years. And like you said, it'll always be. It's quintessential classic rock. So Something About You, I think, is a really good song. Um it's like a fast ballad, I guess. It's really melodic, but I don't know. I just I've always really liked this one, and I like the fact that it says something about the strength of this album. It's the second to last song, and you're still really high quality songs on this. There's just no beats
Yeah.
wrong.
I would say that that's probably the least played on classic rock radio of all those songs. I think I've heard that one, but I'm not sure. That's the reason why I always say seven out of the eight gets
I think
played a
I heard
lot.
it, and I
But
think the reason I remember it is I was so pleasantly surprised.
yeah, yeah. But you're absolutely right that what would be considered like a deep cut on the record is still a great like song, and
Yeah.
could,
When
could
the
get
yeah, I mean, it just went that album is just a monolith of an album. It's so good. So
yeah.
your number eight.
Eight. My number eight is from Third Stage. It's Cool the Engines. You mentioned it as almost making your list. I remember getting this album when it came out. I was always a fan of Tom Scholz's guitar playing and his guitar sound. It always reminded me a little bit of Randy Rhoads. That maybe Randy took an influence from Tom, Randy's guitar sound and some of his playing. And at that time, I was all about rockers and rockin' and guitars and let's go. So I remember being a little bit put off by Amanda. It was a little too mellow for me, but then I got this album anyways, and I really dug Cool the Engines. It's got that intro to it. I forget what they call it, lift off or something. It's the space sounds and all that kind of thing, rocket ship taking off, and then this kicks in, and it's a sort of a classic rock and roll type of riff. It just kicks in really well. I love the chorus. I think that's a really cool title. Cool the Engines. Boston's sort of weird. They almost have, I don't know if it's because I think it's because of the album covers. They always have this space theme on the album covers. So this, sort of ties into that. But I love the riff. I love the chorus. I love the energy of it. They played this live when I saw them, and I was really glad that they did because I think it's a really cool song. So that comes in at number eight for me.
Good choice. Yeah, you're right. I mean, another thing that you mentioned the intro of that song on that greatest hits album I was talking about. That song follows "Don't Look Back," and those two songs sound so good, one going into the other, because
Yeah,
it
yeah,
almost sounds like they were meant to be played one after the other. And I mean, yeah, I mean, they always had great artwork.
yeah.
Love the logo. Um, just a classic gatefold. And I always love the information, the liner notes that Tom Scholz put in here about the making of the album. So I got this out because my number eight is it's a weird title. It's one of those, combined titles, but can't you say Still in Love? So this was the third single from Third Stage, peaked at number 20. I remember it getting more airplay than like I remember getting a lot of airplay, so I'm surprised that it only got to number 20. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's it's just typical radio Boston that you'd like to hear. It's Brad singing the way only Brad can. And the Still in Love part's interesting because it's almost like they had part of another song where it goes into this slow midsection and Brad's just kind of, I don't know, vamping the vocal and then Tom's sort of answering with the guitars, but then in typical Boston fashion, it kicks back in. It's very grandiose. It's got a beautiful guitar line as the main melody, and I've always really liked it. And that did not make the greatest hits, which is another thing. They've never had a singular because they were on Sony and then they were on MCA and
Yeah,
they've
yeah.
never had a singular really good greatest hits that you can go out and say, well, this is you get this, you'll have most of what you need. They deserve better than that. So, you know, if Tom Scholz ever gets the rights, because that's what it would have to take. I'm not interested in re-records.
You're
I'm
right.
interested in the original versions presented that way, but there should really be a, if not a box set, then a good two-disc best of. But that's my number 8. Can't you say Still in Love?
Nice. Number 7, from Don't Look Back, Feeling Satisfied. I really like the clean guitar part. When he underneath the when you let go, nothing's gonna help you
My
more
number
than
7 too.
rock
We're
and
we're
roll.
we're
Yeah.
matching.
Yeah, great, great song. I love those hand claps in the chorus. Ooh, are you feeling
Yeah,
satisfied?
that's
And I
so
love
tip.
when,
That's so Boston though. They
yeah,
love the hand
exactly.
claps.
And I love when Brad, it's almost like he's speaking, it's like he can belt, but there's those times where he does it where he's almost like talking very soft. Ooh, are you feeling satisfied?
Yeah,
It's this very like sort of relaxed sort of voice, and it's like angelic. You'll hear
yeah,
me use that expression a lot with his vocals. So it's just kind of, and Boston also has this like feel that it feel uplifting and feel good nature to a lot of their songs and to a lot of their choruses, the way the songs sort of build and release and everything. So this is just a fun song. I've always loved it, loved the chorus in it. So number 7, Feeling Satisfied for me.
yeah.
And
It's
you're
my
number
number
7.
7 too. It was the third single from Don't Look Back. Just missed the top 40 in the U.S. Peaked at 46. But to me, it's every bit as good as anything on that first album. And um, I do hear it now, probably on the radio more than I did back in the 90s when I kind of get into this stuff, like buying the old albums. I'd never heard it before. I had the Don't Look Back record. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's one of those things where if you can't get into this song, I have to wonder, are you a Boston fan? Because everything that Boston is here. It's got the harmonies, it's got the great lead vocal, it's got all those guitars, it's got the hand claps, it feels good.
Yeah,
It's just a quintessential Boston song as far as I'm concerned.
nice.
So
Okay, we're at
so
6.
you're number
So
6, yeah. So
am I
we've
number
matched
6?
exact twice now.
Right.
The
I'm
same
back to the
position.
first record. Or no, actually, wait, number 6. No, I'm not back to the first record yet. But I'm going to be back to the first record at some point. But I'm still on this record for the title track. I think the riff is really catchy. I think the chorus is great. I love, love, love like the guitar melodies that Tom plays in his solos. They're so melodic. His tone is so great. It's just again another sort of quintessential Boston sound, and for this one it's just those melodic guitar parts. When he solos, there are moments where he kind of does fast little things, but they tend to be melodies when he solos, and I think that it's just fantastic. I love that line. I can see it took so long just to realize.
Yeah.
uh just great, great stuff. So that comes in at number 6 for me.
More on that later. So my number 6 is one that it just missed your top 10. It's Foreplay and Long Time. Um, it's I remember the first time that I heard this. I think I'd heard Long Time by itself on the radio, but I don't think I'd heard the full intro. And I remember thinking at first, before I realized it was Boston, I thought this has got to be Deep Purple. I thought for sure that was John
Yeah,
Lord.
yeah, yeah. The keyboard. Yeah,
I thought that was
absolutely.
for sure that was John Lord on the organ. And then of course, boom, boom, and then do
Hmm.
do, and then it's
Yeah,
undeniably Boston, right? And one thing I notice about Boston's sound, one of the reasons it sounds so bright and upbeat is I think they always tune their guitars a little sharp. So in other
interesting.
words, when they hit an E chord, it almost sounds
Yeah.
like an F. I think that's one of the reasons
Wow.
everything sounds so upbeat
Yeah.
and positive. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think that they played an A440.
Interesting.
Like I
Yeah.
think if you were sit down with your guitar and try to play along with Boston, you'd have to do a little bit of retuning.
Yeah. Interesting.
But,
Nice. Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
mean,
Great pick. Yeah. It
both of
should.
those
It.
songs are, I mean, they don't really fit together, but they fit together. They're like it's like We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions.
Yeah. And it's
It's
one of
like
those things that they always play those two
what's like
songs
Journey
together.
feeling that way anytime.
Yeah.
You need to hear
Exactly.
those songs together, right? And
Yeah.
I remember when after Brad Delp died, I remember seeing this video of this young kid playing drums. He must have been 6 or 7. He was just little, barely get on the kit, and he played foreplay, and it was amazing doing those diddly 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 diddly, like
Wow.
doing those
Yeah.
turnarounds like that. And but yeah, that's it's just a great um piece of art. The two of them together. It's not a medley, but they belong together, and it's such a it's an all-time classic. And that's one that I don't of all the songs in that first album, when that comes on the radio, I don't think I ever turn it. I think, no, I'm going to listen to
Right.
this again.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely legendary. Okay, number five for me is we're back to the debut album. I think this was on your uh honorable mentions list. For me, Smokin'. Uh it's a boogie rock type of thing, but man, I just love the energy in this, and I love the chorus. Do smoking,
Yeah.
do smoking. I mean, it reminds me of, and I think I have sort of a nostalgic feeling for this song because before I was old enough to go into clubs, where I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, they used to have things that were called bazaars. I don't know if you know what a bazaar
Right. Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
Tim. It's sort of like churches used to do them where I
Like
lived, where
Bazaar.
yeah, and what it was is they were usually with, in fact, they were always with churches, at least in the area where I was, and it was a way for a church to do a fundraiser, and they would have games you could play and food and stuff like that, and they would have local cover bands. In my area, it was all cover bands, and so this was the only way for me to hear like local bands like this, and all of them were playing classic rock, and all of them played at least one Boston song, and Smokin' was like a regular inside a lot of these guys, on their set list. So I just love it. It's a great driving rockin' song. It's the title is just perfect for it. I love the chorus. Yeah, so I had to put it high up on my list. So number five, Smokin'.
Yeah. It's good. You know, can't complain there. So my number five, we're sticking with the debut, is Peace of Mind. I think another thing Boston were really good at is a combination of acoustic and electric guitars
Mm.
because they do it in a long time, but Peace of Mind being the second track in the album. Um, I mean, what can you say about a song that follows More Than a Feeling on an album and you don't immediately hit rewind and it's not a skip? It's a great song.
Yeah.
It's and Brad Delp's, the way he does the look ahead, like at the
Yeah.
end, and then you've got his own harmonies around him.
Yeah. No, it's unbelievable.
Like and they make the tambourine. Da, 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 they always mix the tambourine in there. It's just feel good rock music, and it's like I said, they created a new kind of music because it wasn't metal, it wasn't um it wasn't really poppy rock either. There was lots of guitars. It was all upbeat, all positive,
Hmm.
and it was commercial in that it just had that broad appeal. Um and it was a minor hit, but I mean, it just everybody knows it because it's the second song on that first album. It gets a ton of
Yeah,
play, and I don't think it's not a song I burn out on either.
nice. Okay, my number four is going back to a third stage here for Can't You Say You Believe in Me slash Still in Love. That intro, acapella intro with all the voices there. I mean, it's just wow. And to think that bands did this back in that day without any assistance from computers. That's all real. That's all natural, kids. There's no faking that. That's it's the real thing. They really did that. Brad, I mean, we've said this over and over. His vocals are absolutely amazing on this one. His soaring range, it's so passionate. It's kind of a ballad, let's call it a mid-tempo ballad. The melody line is great. I absolutely love the layered guitars, way the guitars layer and build right before the Jew, can't you see you? But the last
Yeah,
chorus is just
that's another
like,
thing. Tom
oh
Scholes
my
pick
goodness,
slides,
man.
loves his pick
Yeah,
slide.
exactly. Yeah, it's like, the guitars just layer and then can't you see it? These like millions of vocals, and it's just like, whoa, this is just
Majestic.
like a
Yeah.
songwrite. Yeah, majestic. That's a great word. This is just like a songwriting clinic on, I'm a big person. I say this all the time. When I'm listening to something, if the song ends and I can't remember anything about it, that to me is a bad song. Or if the only thing I remember about it is like, oh yeah, the drummer did this really fast drum fill at some point or something, or something like superficial like that. But if I can't remember anything about the song, it's just not a good song. These are the type of songs that I don't know how it's possible if you heard this song for the first time, how you wouldn't remember this chorus. I mean, it is the definition of a hook, and
Yeah.
they were
Oh, there's
so,
hooks,
so
and
good
there's
at
the
that.
best of the Boston songs had hooks all the way through,
Yeah,
all the way through the song.
absolutely. The guitar parts, the just the whole, it is so well produced and just so well done. It's like nothing sounds like it doesn't belong. I mean, it's over the top in a lot of ways, but it doesn't sound over the top. It doesn't sound like ridiculous, like, oh, they're just doing this just to do it. It's like it all serves the song. It all makes sense. Everything is in the right place. It's so well done. It's so well produced that it's just fantastic. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I should say also Barry Goudreau, both of them, they could be flashy guitar players when they wanted to,
Yeah,
but they played for the song. They
absolutely.
had the chops, but yeah, good choice. Um, so my number four, I'm going to go to actually the first time that a new Boston song came out when I was actively a fan, and that would be from this album, 1994, Walk On. That's the first track in the album, I Need Your Love. That was the first single, like I said, 1994. So it's 8 years, another 8 years after Third Stage. 1994, you know, the rock landscape is not what it was in 1986 for a band
Hmm.
like Boston. But this song came out. I remember I was working in radio at this point. It came out on an MCA sampler, and I listened to it over and over and over again, and I was just hooked instantly. I mean, this sounds like classic Boston to me, and I love how it's got that spacey kind of intro, and then, like we said, pick slide into the song,
Yeah.
and we're off to the races. Now, I wasn't 100% sure when I first heard it. I thought it might have been Brad Delp, but it's not. It's Fran Cosmo. And but he does a good job, and it's very Boston sounding, and it's got the verses lighten up a little bit, but then the chorus, full on hooky chorus. Um, this song did okay considering when it came out. It peaked at 51 on Billboard, and it actually got all the way up to 17 in Canada, which isn't bad considering the time period. And the album went single platinum. So, they went from an album that's at 17 million with the debut Don't Look Back, I think it's 7 million, Third Stage 3 or 4 million, and now they've got a single million seller. Well, okay. They're crying all the way to the bank, I'm sure. Um, but yeah, and I think that there's some other songs in here that are kind of cool, but it does run out of steam. One thing I will say, if anybody is curious about, what Tom Scholz does as a soloist, there's a medley on here called the Walk On Medley, and
Hmm.
there's one where it's just him playing guitar, and the sound is it sounds so good, the tone, and he
Hmm.
plays some pretty fast licks in it actually. But yeah, that's my number four is I Need Your Love from Walk On.
Nice. Okay, number three. There's definitely a burnout factor in this song, but and I wasn't even going to put it on my list, but I found myself listening to it and I listened to the whole thing and I just couldn't deny that this is an amazing song. And it's a song that if you had to, if somebody, space aliens landed and their first question out of their mouth is what is classic rock? This might be the song you would play for them. And that's more than a feeling.
Yeah.
It is. It's just one of those songs that sort of defines this era and this style. It's a song that if I have friends that aren't into rock, that have only they only listen to jazz or classical or something like that, I can play them this song and say, "See, rock isn't all caveman dumb stuff, you know. It can be really beautiful, it can be really intelligent." It's one of those songs that everybody knows it, even if they're not sure who. I could play it for my parents, and I'm sure they would know the song, but probably wouldn't know who does the song, you know, that type of thing.
Yeah.
It's one of those songs if it comes in and when you're at a stadium at a hockey game, you know, everybody's singing along with it. It's a song that rockers and metalheads and everybody is okay with liking. The intro, the it's got everything that's great about Boston, right? The intro, the clean guitars. I close my eyes and I go away. Dun, 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 you know, the distorted guitars, the hand claps, the
Yeah.
chorus is super catchy, the guitar is melodic. It's just you know, it's just one of those songs that you have to respect it, even though there's a burnout factor involved in it because it's gotten played. But you have to just admire the songcraft, the playing, the musicianship, the singing, the production, just everything about it. So I felt like I had to give it its due respect and have it high on my list. So it comes in at number three for.
So my number three would be the second song I ever heard from Boston, and that's We're Ready from Third Stage. This was the second single. It's the second song on the album, and I think this song has just gotten better to me. I just think it's such a cool song. I wouldn't call it a ballad. It builds. It's more of a rock. It's a slow rocker, but it has parts that really have some intensity to them. But it's such a classic Boston riff. When you hear those hi-hats, dun, 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 it sneaks up on you. Um, I love the guitar melody. Like it's just so classic Boston. And again, they managed, I think it went to number six. They managed a top 10 single without videos. I gotta
Yeah.
salute those guys. I mean, that took a that took a lot of guts to do that because I remember around this time there were some classic bands that were saying, we don't do videos. Journey was one of them and Van Halen was the other, but both of them ended up putting out live videos for the songs because it was like the record labels like you got to give MTV something. But Boston did not do that. And but yeah, We're Ready is such a great song. Again, that's another one that didn't make the greatest hits. And it's like it was a top 10 single. How do you not put that on a greatest hits album?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just weird. So yeah, that's my number three.
Okay, my number two is A Man I'll Never Be from Don't Look Back.
Yeah.
This is just a beautiful ballad. The lyrics are fantastic. Brad Delp is amazing and emotional. Those clean arpeggiated guitars are like angelic in their heavenly in their sound. The song just builds fantastically. The solo really reminds me of I've never I don't know if I've ever heard Randy Rhoads mention Tom Scholz in an interview, but man, I hear this solo and it just sounds so much like Randy Rhoads to me. Reminds me of like Goodbye to Romance. You know, listen to this solo and then think about listen to the Goodbye to Romance. Randy has more chops and speed to his playing, but this sort of melodicism and everything is just absolutely beautiful. I love the way the song sort of modulates at the end, and that organ that comes in at the end is just such a brilliant production touch, and just the lyrics are just so touching, and the vocals, and knowing Brad's story and everything. It's just an absolutely amazing song. I mean, when I was putting this together and I listened to that song, I mean, my eyes got watery.
It's
It's a
haunting.
beautiful, beautiful
With
song.
what happened
Very
to
haunting.
Brad,
Yeah.
even though Tom wrote it, but when you hear Brad sing those lyrics,
Yeah.
man, like it's just heart-wrenching. But it's
Yep.
a great song. Great song.
Yeah.
So my number two is More Than a Feeling. I mean, how do you not put it in, right? It's one of the greatest rock anthems of all time. And as many times as I've heard it, I when I hear it come on, especially if I'm in a situation where I'm not in control of the music, I try to put myself in the situation. Imagine you were hearing this for the first time. You're like, oh, what's going to happen here? Where's this song going? And then it just hits you with that chorus. And also, for anybody, I mean, the chorus riff is easy enough to play, and everybody thinks they can play the intro. They can't. But the link between the verse and the chorus, that what's going on underneath there? I've never been able to figure out what those chords
Mm,
are. And during the solo, it's all over the place.
yeah.
So, it's a pretty deep song
Hmm.
musically. It's just that melody is so instantly memorable. You don't notice how uh chops heavy, what a musicologist song it really is. And something that I never noticed before until I saw Rick Beato talking about this song. When you get to the end of the solo and it stops and it goes back to the clean part,
Hmm.
that's a drop D bass note.
Wow.
When it goes down,
Yeah, yeah,
down,
you're right.
down, bow.
Yeah,
You got that
yeah,
low
yeah.
D note. I'm like, I like it even more now. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know what more to say about it. That's my number two, More Than a Feeling.
Nice. Okay, number one for me is it's from the first album, and for me, it's almost like a signature song for the band, and that's a rock and roll band. And maybe it's because of the whole "we were just another band out
Yeah.
of Boston on the road," it sort of has this autobiographical feel to it. But I just love the energy of it. The chorus is great. I love in the like that last verse there when he goes up really high, sign the record company
Yeah. Yeah.
contract, and he just goes into that like
Yeah.
stratosphere with his voice.
You
That
feel
is
the excitement.
just
You feel
so
like you're
cool.
there with them. You're like,
Exactly. It's just such a cool, like, just vibe to the song. Again, it's sort of like they're singing about themselves. And I just love the whole vibe of it. And, they do these things like More Than a Feeling that are very textured and layered, but then they can do these songs that they still got a lot of little things going on in them, but in their essence, they're rock and roll songs, but they're able to put their sort of their signature on it. And yeah, it's such a fun song. I just love it. It's like it's a again, it's just like a feel good song. And I always kind of think of it as like they don't have like some bands have songs. Iron Maiden has a song called Iron Maiden. Motorhead
right.
has a song
Night
called Motorhead.
Ranger,
Well,
Blue
Boston
Murder,
doesn't,
Bad
right.
Company.
Boston doesn't have that, but
That's
this
the
is kind of
closest
that
thing. Yeah.
song. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Um, Also, I like the fact that it's listed as being a length of 260. I always thought that was funny. That showed a little sense. There was a little bit of a sense of humor. You didn't see much of it. So my number one is Don't Look Back.
Yeah.
I will never get tired of Don't Look Back. I think it is just a titan of a song. And I don't even know where to start. I think every part of it is a hook. The guitar riff is a hook. The tambourine's a hook. The
Yeah.
octave bass line, boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Very simple. All it needs to be. The midsection. Oh, the sun is shining, and I'm
Yeah.
on that road. Like that, it's just the way it builds. Lots of cool pick slides. And at the end, the very last. when it kicks back in and you've got like the spaceship taking off. It's just such an epic song. I love it so much. There's never any question that was going to be my favorite. And it might be controversial to say I like it more than a feeling. More than a feeling is
Mhm.
great, but Don't Look Back is better.
Yeah.
It's just got everything that I love about this type of music. Um, it's melodic, but it rocks. It's just every part of this. It's just a masterpiece of a song to me.
Nice. Yeah, okay, I'm not gonna argue with you there. Great pick. Great pick.
So there you go, folks. And again, I think both of us we showed a fair amount of restraint, not not just concentrating on the first album, especially when you've only got 10 spots and a few honorables. I like the fact that we've covered every album except for, we've covered every full-length album, and there really isn't that much. I
Mm,
was I did a show recently um, with Daniel from Bicycle Lakes for his channel, and we were talking specifically about the Don't Look Back album, and I mentioned that I forgot that I had this cassette. I'll hold it up here. This is some live stuff and some demos. So from
mm,
77 and 75. And so most of the songs you'd recognize, but there are three songs on here that never made a Boston album. There's one called Get It Out of My Mind. There's one called Television Politician, and there's one called I Don't Want to Lose You. Um, would love to have like expanded versions of something, but with Tom Scholes, I don't think you're ever going to get those,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah.
Because his I understand the high standards, but at the same time, when I hear the more recent albums, like, these could be better. If you had someone that was saying, I don't know about that one. Maybe you should, I don't know.
Hmm.
But anyway, um, those are our top 10 Boston songs, folks. What do you all think? Comment below. I want to thank John Gaffney for sitting in with this, John. I know you've got your channel there of The Alchemist. You tell us what's coming up on that, and also Kicked in the Teeth, your podcast that you do with Martin Popoff. Where else can people find you?
Sure. Lair the Alchemist on Facebook. I got my Lair the Alchemist YouTube channel where we talk all things heavy metal and hard rock. Have a weekly show on there that I do Dudes Talk and Metal, where I get some metal dudes together and we talk about heavy metal. Program that I do called Sabbath Sunday, every the occasional Sunday where we talk Black Sabbath. I also have a Black Sabbath podcast, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast that I do with my friend Darren. And I do an Iron Maiden podcast with my Swedish buddy Matthias, called A Pod Somewhere in Time. And of course, you mentioned Kicked in the Teeth, an AC/DC podcast that I do with the guy everybody knows, Martin Popoff, a great author, journalist, really cool and super knowledgeable guy. So you can find those podcasts on any of the streaming services. So yeah, thanks for having me on, Tim. This was really a blast. I really enjoyed going back and diving into the Boston catalog.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, John. And don't forget, folks, follow what John just mentioned to you. Follow his channel and listen to his podcasts. And yeah, and don't forget to hit subscribe on this. A lot of people are watching that aren't subscribed yet. Doesn't cost you a thing. Just hit subscribe. And we will see you later on Tim's Vinyl Confessions.